This is Tom Weakley in Arlington, Vermont. These are some of my memories of baseball in Jamestown in the 1940s. I was born in 1929. I remember my father, Earl Weakley, who was then a partner in the wholesale confectionery firm of Weakley Olson, then located on Market Street, but a street that no longer exists. I remember him taking me to games in the ballpark down in Falconer, which was new then. I had nothing to compare it with then, but it looked pretty good to me, being built of brick and having various entrances to the grandstands. There was a certain magic, an anticipation built up as you came through the front gates, because you saw only the brick wall on the back of the stands in front of you, yet you could hear the crowd noises. You could hear the vendors calling, the crack of bats against ball, the flat popping of balls caught in the glove. And then as you made your way up the steps to the top of the stands, the sounds grew in intensity and your heart raced because you knew you were getting closer to the real action. Then I would come up on the last step and the platform behind the grandstand seats, and I could look out on the stadium, and the grass never looked greener, the bases whiter, the lights more dazzling. It was what I imagined the feeling to be if you'd been blind and they took the gauze off your eyes and you could suddenly see. I remember some of the players, but I'm afraid not terribly well. Maybe if I describe them, other people can put names to them. I seem to remember a Johnny Newman playing. As I recall, Newman was a great hitter. He was a rotund player and had a lot of muscle and power, and when he hit, we might get a home run out of him. As I look back on it now, it seems to me that the crowd was either cheering wildly for him or booing his performance and remarking about his figure, his awkwardness, his rolling walk. He was either hero or heel, the subject of adoration or comedy. It can't be said that we didn't have passionate feelings either way. I also remember a coach or a manager of one of the out-of-town teams. I want to say Jake LaMotta, but he might have been a prize fighter for all I know. I think it was Jake someone, though. His name had that sort of ring to it. He was a kind of banty rooster, pacing in the dugout or coaching along the baselines. He was quick to argue with the umpires, and we loved to see him storm out of his dugout, spittle flying from his lips as he snarled his way over to the umpire to air his grievance. We would boo and catcall, all the while smiling and laughing, because we knew our derision was as much a show on our part as his rage was on his. It was part of the game for us, and I think when that team came to town, I remember it as Olean, but in other words, when that team came to town, the stands and bleachers would be full. I can still recall to my inner ear the call of the boys hawking peanuts. Maybe they were men, but they were hawking Cracker Jack and hot dogs, soda, and the ever-present pre-game calling of, "Get your lucky number scorecard." My dad always bought a scorecard, and we checked our number on it to see if we won when they announced it during one of the early innings. We never did. But he taught me how to score the game with those diagonal lines and code marks in the little boxes, none of which I remember today. Greg Malevy. Now there's a name that comes to mind out of nowhere now that I'm opening my mind back to the 1940s. Greg Malevy, was he the manager of the Falcons then? I recall that he was pretty well respected by everyone. It would be interesting to hear what others, maybe older than I was then, thought of him. My memory might have been glossed over by the fascination with the game and the players, etc. I always thought that the Falcons were simply the Falcons because they played in Falconer. It never occurred to me that they might belong to some other team, a big league team. I assume they did even back then, but I don't know what team they might have belonged to. I never connected that. To me, they were an entity to themselves, and we kind of rose or fell with their fortunes. Never occurred to me to ask where they went after they kind of grew up out of that class of ball. Did they win games? I can't remember, but I guessed that they did, or my dad wouldn't have been interested. They must have won enough anyway to give us an even chance that our team might win. I never read the sports pages of the newspaper. I never followed any big league teams. I really didn't even follow the Falcons that way. If I wasn't at a game, I don't remember making note of whether they won or not. Unless maybe toward the end of the season, if they were in contention for a pennant, then I might have paid more attention. So each game was, for me, an isolated event, a gem in a setting of its own. I remember it less as part of a pattern or an ongoing season than I do as a special event to be shared between me and my dad. I think occasionally someone else might have gone with us from outside our family, and I recall being jealous of the time and attention my father gave them when we were sitting there. I visited that stadium a couple of years ago with George Gamelch, who was gathering material for a book on minor league ball players. I bought a bag of unshelled peanuts and ate them while I watched the game alone. George was interviewing people elsewhere. I ate those peanuts in memory of my father. At one of the games we attended together, he wanted a bag of peanuts, as he always did. Now, I didn't eat peanuts. I didn't enjoy them. Now, he'd tried to get the attention of the peanut vendor with no success. Finally, I whistled to get the man's attention. I had a great shrill whistle back then. Now, when the vendor looked up, I held up a finger to indicate that we wanted one bag. He tossed the bag to us, or maybe passed it down the row of seats. I handed it to my dad, who opened it and began shelling the peanuts and tossing them back into his mouth. The peanut man stood out in the aisle, frowning toward us. I poked my father. "What?" he asked. "The guy's waiting for his money," I said. "Well, pay him then." "Why should I pay him?" I said. "Well, you're the one who whistled for him, aren't you?" "Yes, but, well then, you're the one he's frowning at." "I don't even like peanuts," I protested. "Oh, all right," he said with feigned resignation. He dug around in his pocket, came up with a dime, handed it to me, and I passed it on down the row, averting my red face from the people in the row who were looking expectantly in our direction. I remember that the men back then wore hats a lot. They didn't wear baseball caps or duck-bill caps the way a lot of people do today. They tended to wear fedoras, soft felt hats with a brim all the way around and a pinched crown. My dad wore one of those, and I think a lot of his friends did too. It'd be interesting to see pictures of the ballpark back then to see if all the men were wearing the same kind of hat. I remember on those hot summer nights, we probably always went at night. Now that I think of it, I'm not sure we ever went to day games, but maybe we did. But they would be hot, and my dad wouldn't take his hat off so much as he would push it back on the top of his head, away from his eyes, so that the sweat on his brow could kind of evaporate in the night air while he tossed these shelled peanuts back into his mouth. Anyway, this past couple of years when I sat there in the auditorium, the stadium, eating those peanuts, it was just wonderful to sit there in the familiar setting with its familiar sounds in my ear and its familiar colors in my eyes, with its familiar smells in my nose, remembering with glad heart my father that night teaching me the elements of comedy.